It was 8:23 p.m. Eastern Time when Ibrahim Traoré picked up his phone and dialed CNN's news desk directly. But the receptionist who answered had no idea she was about to connect the young African president to the woman who had just called him. A primitive dictator playing dress-up on live television. What happened in the next 47 minutes would become the most watched CNN segment in network history, but not for the reasons Jessica Hartwell expected. By the time Traoré finished speaking, Hartwell would be crying on camera. CNN's stock would drop 23%, and the network would face a scandal so massive that it would change how American media covers Africa forever. But to understand how Traoré silenced the CNN studio and how Jessica Hartwell's racist comment became the end of her own career, we need to go back to how everything started that evening. That evening, CNN's main news studio in Manhattan was at its usual intensity. Jessica Hartwell, a 42-year-old seasoned anchor, was hosting the important international affairs program. In her 15-year career, she had interviewed dozens of world leaders, but none had prepared her for what awaited her that night. "Our guest this evening," said Jessica, smiling at the camera, "is Ibrahim Traoré, one of the rising young leaders in Africa recently. As president of Burkina Faso, he presents himself as a Democrat, but how democratic is he really?" The studio was busy with live broadcast preparations. While the technical crew made final adjustments, producer Jake Williams was giving Jessica last-minute notes. "Jessica," Jake whispered in her ear, "this kid is very popular in the media, but our research team found interesting information about him. Military coup, authoritarianism, human rights." Jessica nodded. These kinds of interviews were her specialty. African leaders were usually easy targets. American viewers didn't know enough about them, and they could often be treated disrespectfully. But what Jessica didn't know was that at that moment in Ouagadougou, Traoré was sitting in his office, carefully listening to every word. "First of all," said Jessica on live television, "there's something our viewers need to know. Ibrahim Traoré presents himself as a so-called democratic leader, but the truth is he came to power through a military coup." As Traoré's picture appeared, on screen Jessica's voice continued, "And now he's giving speeches at the United Nations as if he were a legitimate leader. But the truth is he's just a primitive dictator playing dress-up." As the words primitive dictator spread through television screens, no one realized this would be the end of Jessica Hartwell's career. At that moment in Traoré's office in Ouagadougou, there was deep silence. As the young president listened to Jessica's words from his laptop screen, his expression changed. Not anger, but cold determination appeared. "Marie," said Traoré to his media advisor Marie Caboret, "find me the CNN news desk number." "Mr. President, what are you planning to do?" Marie asked anxiously. "I want to give Ms. Hartwell a lesson in democratic leadership," Traoré replied, his eyes still on the screen. In the CNN studio, Jessica was continuing her speech. "These African leaders are really funny. They think they're equal to us, but the truth is, most of them are people who came out of the jungle with low education levels." At that moment, the studio phone rang. Jake Williams took the call from reception. "Jessica, there's a call from the president of Burkina Faso. He wants to connect to the live broadcast." Jessica was surprised, but saw this as an opportunity. "Perfect," she said with a smile. "Our viewers will be able to see the real Ibrahim Traoré." None of them knew this would be the biggest mistake in CNN history. "Ladies and gentlemen," said Jessica, turning to the camera, "we now have Ibrahim Traoré live on the line. President Traoré, hello." "Hello, Miss Hartwell," came Traoré's calm but determined voice echoing through the studio. "I was watching your program. Very interesting comments you're making." Jessica was confident. "President Traoré, I'm just telling the truth. American viewers need to know the real face of African leaders." "The truth," said Traoré with a slight smile in his voice. "Then let me give you a real education, Ms. Hartwell." Jessica's confidence was shaken for the first time. Traoré's tone wasn't what she expected. "First," said Traoré, "you characterized me as a primitive dictator. An interesting choice, because if you had researched my educational background, you would have seen that I have master's degrees from the Sorbonne and an MBA from the London School of Economics." Jessica tried to open her mouth, but Traoré continued. But the most interesting part is your portrayal of me as an uneducated person from the jungle. Because I currently speak 5 languages. How many languages do you speak? Ms. Hartwell. Silence fell over the studio. Jessica's face reddened. Second, Traoré continued, about democracy. Since I've been in office in Burkina Faso, we've held 4 free elections. Turnout was 89%. What was the turnout in America's last elections? Jake. Williams was frantically signaling to Jessica, but it was too late. But what I really want to talk about, said Traoré, his voice becoming even more determined, is how CNN handles Africa. Ms. Hartwell, I have very interesting information about you and CNN executives. Jessica's face went pale. What? What? Do you mean? For 8 months, I've been recording private conversations between CNN executives about their Africa coverage, Ms. Hartwell. And today, your racist attack gave me the perfect excuse to reveal everything. Panic began in the studio. Jake Williams was making frantic signals, but Traoré didn't stop. For example, said Traoré calmly, I have a recording of CNN Vice President Michael Roberts saying last month that Africa stories should only be about conflict and poverty because it brings more ratings. Jessica Hartwell was experiencing the shock of her life. This is impossible. Or, Traoré continued, your conversation with the Africa desk editor 3 months ago. You said, who do these Africans think they are equal to us? Do you remember? Jessica's hands began to tremble. She had really had this conversation, but how had it been recorded? Ms. Hartwell, said Traoré, his voice now ice-cold, the problem is that your and CNN's approach to Africa is based on systematic racism, and I have proof of this. Jake Williams was now considering cutting the live broadcast, but millions of viewers were watching with fascination. But the most striking part, Traoré continued, was when I learned the reasons why CNN deliberately keeps its Africa news coverage negative. What reasons? Jessica stammered. 3 of CNN's major advertisers are companies that do mining in Africa, Ms. Hartwell, and these companies make money not from Africa's stability, but from its chaos. Stable African countries reduce these companies' exploitation opportunities. This revelation had a bombshell effect in the studio. Jessica looked on in amazement. So there are economic interests behind CNN's constant negative portrayal of Africa, Traoré continued. Ms. Hartwell, you're not just racist, you're also a puppet of corporate interests. Jessica was now starting to cry. Please, this is going too far. Too far, said Traoré incredulously. You humiliated me on live television by calling me a primitive dictator, but when I respond with facts, I'm going too far. Traoré's voice was now filled with anger. Ms. Hartwell, what you and CNN are doing isn't just racism. It's systematic disinformation. You deliberately portray Africa badly to legitimize American companies' exploitation. I wasn't aware of these things, Jessica sobbed. Ignorance isn't a defense, it's complicity, Traoré exploded. When you use your official position to humiliate African leaders, this isn't personal revenge, it becomes institutional racism. Jake Williams now decided to cut the broadcast, but Traoré dropped his final bomb. And finally, Ms. Hartwell, here's some personal information for you. CNN executives call you a useful idiot in private conversations about you. They use you as the face of anti-Africa propaganda, but they never take you seriously. This final blow completely destroyed Jessica. She began crying hysterically in front of the camera. This is your true face, said Traoré mercilessly. Racist, uninformed, and manipulable. This is the perfect summary of America's approach to Africa. Jessica removed her microphone and ran out of the studio. Traoré's final words reached millions of Americans. America, you've seen the true face of your media. Racism, corporate interests, and manipulation. And when these are challenged, they run away crying. In the minutes following Jessica Hartwell's complete destruction, global social media exploded. CNN racism exposed, Jessica Hartwell destroyed, and Traoré reveals truth went viral simultaneously. There was panic at CNN. Executives called an emergency meeting. Cut all reruns, shouted the broadcast director. and prepare an emergency statement. Within 24 hours, CNN apologized 3 times, fired Jessica Hartwell, and announced new ethical rules regarding Africa coverage. But the biggest shock came when Traoré released all CNN recordings WikiLeaks style. 8 months of conversation recordings exposed CNN's systematic anti-Africa bias. The Federal Communications Commission fined CNN $50 million. The European Broadcasting Union also imposed similar sanctions. Jessica Hartwell lost her media career and was forced to participate in a post-racism rehabilitation program. A month later, Traoré received an official apology visit from CNN's new Africa bureau chief. "President Traoré," said the new bureau chief, "as CNN, we are ashamed of our past approach. We want to completely renew our Africa coverage." "Change is always possible," Traoré replied, "but it comes after giving respect, not before." 6 months later, while teaching a media ethics course at Harvard, Traoré said, "Jessica Hartwell actually gave me a gift by making a racist attack on me. She showed the world the true face of American media. Sometimes our greatest enemies become our greatest teachers," he added. "Jessica gave me the platform, and I showed the truth." But the story of how Traoré's systematic destruction unfolded was much more complex than anyone realized. Behind the scenes, the young African leader had orchestrated one of the most sophisticated media takedowns in modern broadcasting history. The recordings that Traoré had been collecting for 8 months weren't just random conversations. They represented a carefully planned intelligence operation designed to expose the racist underbelly of American media coverage of Africa. "The beauty of patience," Traoré would later explain to his communications team, "is that you let your enemies reveal their true nature. You just provide the microphone." And what a microphone he had provided. Within hours of the live broadcast destruction, the media earthquake across America was unprecedented. News organizations that had long followed CNN's model of Africa coverage suddenly found themselves scrambling to review their own practices. The New York Times announced an immediate audit of all Africa-related content from the past 5 years. The Washington Post established a new Africa desk with African journalists. Fox News, ironically, began promoting their fair and balanced Africa coverage as superior to CNN's exposed bias. But Traoré's masterstroke went beyond just exposing CNN's racism. By timing his revelation to coincide with Jessica's live racist rant, he had created a narrative so powerful that even CNN's most loyal viewers couldn't ignore it. The contrast was devastating. On one screen, Americans watched their trusted news anchor calling an African leader primitive and suggesting he belonged in the jungle, while simultaneously learning that this same network had been systematically manipulating their understanding of an entire continent for corporate gain. It wasn't just about the racism, media analyst Anderson Cooper noted on his own CNN program in a remarkable display of network self-criticism. It was about the manipulation. Jessica was calling Africans primitive, while her own network was engaging in the most primitive form of propaganda, lying for money. The international reaction was equally swift and damaging. Within 48 hours, 23 African nations had expelled CNN correspondents and banned the network from operating within their borders. The African Union unanimously condemned CNN and called for a global boycott of the network's advertisers. European networks, sensing an opportunity, began aggressively competing for African coverage rights. The BBC launched Africa Rising, a daily program showcasing African innovation and success stories. France 24 established permanent bureaus in 12 African capitals. Even Al Jazeera, despite being Qatar-based, positioned itself as more respectful of African dignity than American networks. But perhaps the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source: CNN's own employees. Within a week of the broadcast, over 300 CNN staff members signed an open letter acknowledging the network's systematic bias and calling for fundamental changes in how we cover the developing world. Christiane Amanpour, CNN's most respected international correspondent, broke ranks in a stunning on-air statement. "As someone who has covered Africa for decades, I can no longer remain silent about my network's approach to this continent. President Traoré was absolutely correct in his assessment. We have failed in our most basic journalistic duty, to tell the truth without prejudice. The letter, published simultaneously in the Columbia Journalism Review and broadcast live on CNN International, sent shockwaves through the media industry. In a follow-up interview with BBC World Service, Traoré delivered what many would consider the most eloquent explanation of media racism in the digital age. Ms. Hartwell called me primitive because she believes that the color of my skin determines the content of my character. But intelligence has no color, Ms. Hartwell. Dignity has no nationality. And truth is universal. The interview clip garnered over 2 billion views across all platforms. Truth is universal became a global rallying cry for media reform advocates worldwide. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, the political and legal machinery was moving with unprecedented speed. The Federal Communications Commission launched the largest investigation into media bias in its history, specifically focusing on systemic discrimination in international news coverage. Senator Elizabeth Warren, chair of the Senate Commerce Committee, announced congressional hearings on corporate influence in news coverage of developing nations. The evidence presented by President Traoré raises fundamental questions about the integrity of American journalism, Warren declared. If news networks are tailoring their coverage to benefit their advertisers' business interests, that's not journalism, that's propaganda. The hearings, held 3 months after the CNN incident, became a media event in their own right. Traoré was invited to testify via video link from Ouagadougou, and his appearance drew an audience of over 500 million viewers worldwide. Senators, Traoré said, looking directly into the camera, I come before you not as an accuser, but as a voice for truth. The woman who called me primitive on your airwaves was not acting alone. She was the face of a system that profits from the systematic dehumanization of an entire continent. His testimony included the public release of over 200 hours of recorded conversations between CNN executives, advertisers, and government officials, revealing a web of corruption that extended far beyond simple racist commentary. The most damaging recordings revealed CNN executives explicitly discussing how negative Africa coverage helped justify continued Western intervention and resource extraction on the continent. Our job, CNN's now former programming director was heard saying in a 2023 recording, is to make sure Americans see Africa as a problem that needs American solutions. Happy, successful Africans don't sell pharmaceuticals or military contracts. The Senate hearings resulted in the most comprehensive media reform legislation in American history. The Traoré Truth in Broadcasting Act required networks to disclose any financial relationships with companies that might benefit from their coverage, and established harsh penalties for systematic geographical bias. But for Ibrahim Traoré, the victory was about more than just legal reform. It was about fundamentally changing how the world saw Africa and how Africa saw itself. In his final statement on the CNN affair, delivered from the United Nations General Assembly, Traoré addressed not just America, but the entire international community. 6 months ago, a news anchor called me a primitive dictator playing dress-up. Today, I stand before you wearing the same military uniform she mocked, representing the same country she dismissed, speaking for the same people she dehumanized. But something has changed. The world is listening differently now. The speech, delivered to a packed General Assembly hall, received a standing ovation that lasted 12 minutes. But beyond the applause, there was a deeper understanding of what had been accomplished. The African Renaissance Institute, established with funds from CNN's $150 million settlement, became the continent's premier media training organization, dedicated to ensuring that African stories would be told by African voices. Jessica Hartwell gave us an unexpected gift, Traoré said at the Institute's opening ceremony. She reminded us that the most powerful weapon against racism isn't anger, it's truth, delivered with precision and timing. 3 years after the broadcast that shocked the world, CNN had undergone a complete transformation. Under new leadership, the network had become a model for international coverage. with permanent African correspondence, regular positive coverage of continental development, and strict ethical guidelines preventing corporate influence. Jessica Hartwell, after serving her sentence and completing her rehabilitation program, wrote a book titled The Education of a Racist: How Ibrahim Traoré Saved My Soul. In it, she detailed her journey from ignorant prejudice to genuine understanding. "President Traoré didn't just destroy my career that night," she wrote in the book's dedication. "He destroyed my ignorance and rebuilt my humanity. For that, I will be eternally grateful." The book became an international bestseller, with all proceeds donated to African educational charities. Hartwell now works as a diversity consultant, traveling the world to help organizations recognize and eliminate systemic bias. But perhaps the most lasting impact of what became known as the CNN revelation was its effect on global journalism. News organizations worldwide began implementing the Traoré Standard, a comprehensive review process designed to eliminate racist and culturally biased reporting. In the end, Jessica Hartwell had been right about one thing. It had indeed been educational for people to see how real leadership conducts business. She just hadn't expected the lesson to come from the man she had tried to humiliate. The CNN revelation proved that in the modern world, truth travels faster than lies, justice arrives sooner than expected, and sometimes the most powerful response to racism is simply giving racists enough rope to hang themselves, on live television, in front of the entire world.